The circular flow model is sort of a way of visualizing the movement of goods and services and the movement of money. So the movement of goods and services is going to have this general shape that I'll show. First thing I want to get at is the general idea of this circular flow model is we're going to have a firm on one side and the household on the other. And these are sort of the two building blocks of any economy. If you think about it, we said at the beginning of the semester that everyone has unlimited desires. So this is a household. You want a new car and a bigger house and all this. How do you get it? Most of us, we get it by going to work or starting a business, which is the firm. So what we're going to start with how is it that households are able to turn their skills, turn their into money by working, and then turn that money into stuff, new car, bigger house. So the first one we will describe is the resource market. So this is when you go to work. You're a household, you offer up your resources, which generally is your labor. This right here is like an old Ford factory assembly line, to the firm. Right? So this is the flow of goods and services, is you providing services to a firm. Next, we have the product market. This is the firm took your services and my services and put together that car, put it for sale, and you bought it. Okay, so this is the movement of goods and services. You send your services to a firm uses it to produce stuff for you. So I haven't even seen this. There is a Starbucks coffee mug that's has an app. It plugs in, charges, it's awesome. When I first saw it, I was like, this is the silliest thing. And then I got it for Father's Day or something, and it's amazing. It keeps your coffee, because it'll take me, this whole class to drink the coffee. I drink small cups of really strong coffee, so small cups of coffee get cold faster. Anyway, so it's called an Ember, and they have my free endorsement. They just got some free endorsement from me for everyone watching. So you are not going to work for free. The firm is not sending you a car for free. Now we're going to talk about the movement of money. Ooh, Amazon affiliate link, that's a good idea. I'll throw that in my Twitch. So I can't remember if it was this class or another, but somebody's really trying to get me to stream games, even though I told them it would be boring, I'm bad, and nobody would watch. But someday. That was you telling me to stream, or that was you telling me that I was boring, it would be boring, I was bad, and nobody would watch. So resource market this is when you provide your labor, your boss gives you one of these checks. Although I don't really see, most people don't see paper paychecks anymore, right? You get the direct deposit, and you have to look hard to find the stub. You look at the stub, you see all the money that's taken out. You get sad by the amount that actually gets deposited. So movement of money. So this right here is, again, you get a check. All right, well, you didn't work for free. Ford's not giving away that car for free. So we figure out some way of giving money to the firm for cars. And notice we call this a circular flow model because money goes from you to the firm, money goes from the firm back to you. So now let's learn some words associated with these. So for a firm, them paying you is a cost. Those are called costs. For you, that money is income. Right? So if you're a firm, you're thinking about all your costs. The big cost is going to be the money you spend on your workers. You're at home, got money coming in. Chances are it is from an income that you have from working. When you go buy the car, so we call that expenditures. So household expenditures. You'll see that term sometimes when they have like labor stats, government stats that come out. They'll talk about household expenditure surveys. This is what they're getting at, is the money that people spend on stuff. And product market to the firm. So again, when Ford sells you the car, those are revenues for the firm. So if we look at this from the household side, so if you were setting up a family budget, you're sort of balancing your checkbook, although nobody uses checks anymore. I write a check about twice a year and I like forget how to do it. Like you got to remember all your cursive letters, and I don't know. Fortunately, I only do it twice a year when for some reason somebody needs a check. Income, expenditures, that would be sort of plotting out your expenses. Last time I had to write a check was we were at my parents' house. We kenneled our dog for a few days because we have a dog. They have a Mastiff who's huge, and so it's just a lot of dogs running around. And then I went to pay, and it's these like very old people who've been doing this out of their house since I was a kid. And they don't take credit cards; they just take checks. And it worked out really well because I didn't have a check, and my mom had to write me had to let me borrow a check. But it didn't work out as well because I eventually paid her back. She did remember. All right. So now we've got our circular flow model. So we have income and expenditures for your family, your house, and when a company is balancing its books. So if you own stock and you look through the 10K, you will see information on the revenues and costs for the firm. Okay. So now what we are going to do is add government to this circular flow model. So sometimes in the past, I've covered that circular flow model on like the second or third day of school, and we don't get back to, we see it again in this class to add government. Here I decided to do it all at once. So we started off with our simple, most basic way of looking at a circular flow model, which is households and firms. Now what we're doing is adding government to it. Government, we're going to see, big part of macroeconomics. So we're going to throw the government right in the middle. And here's what government does. So the green here, you might remember, represents, I don't care if I articulated this, the green represents the flow of money, because notice in the product market, money is flowing from the household to buy things to the firm who gets them as revenue. In the resource market, money is flowing from the firm to resources, to hiring you back to your house because you're in your paycheck. So I don't know if somebody's saying they're having a hard time seeing me. I'm spotlight. Oh, there we go. It might be, there we go. Yeah, I just spotlighted myself, which I should remember to do, so that way everyone has to look at me. I remember I didn't know what spotlight meant, and I was in a work Zoom before I got here, and I hit the button to spotlight someone's video, which I guess anyone could do. I don't know, maybe I was the host of the meeting anyway, so everyone had to look at this person. We add government. So money flowing from households and firms. Remember, green arrows are the flow of money. When does money flow from your household to the government? When you pay taxes. Next, when is the firms also pay taxes? So we have arrows going from everyone, the households and the firms, to the government. That's where governments get money. So what are taxes? Those are payments from firms and households to a government. So here's some examples. We have our income tax and sales tax. Next, we have transfers, payments from governments to firms and households. So that is something when the government is cutting you a check. So Social Security does that. So when you get old, government will start sending you checks. Solar panel subsidies. So we talked about that's another example of firms sending some. It's another example of government send companies money that makes solar panels. Okay. So net taxes are just taxes minus transfers. So that's just sort of a terminology thing. Like I said, we need to learn, we're going to be learning a lot of terms today. As I've said, I'm trying not to test you on, it's not like I'm specifically going to ask you to memorize definitions, but for the rest of the course, we're going to need to know, there's just some lingo we need to know. All right, so there we go. We all give money to the government. Hopefully they're not just burning it up. Although, as we'll see, it wouldn't actually matter if they were burning it up. We'll see that when we talk about money later. But no, they take the money, use it to buy goods and services. So some examples there are roads, schools, police, national defense, right? So that is money. That is the stuff flowing back out. We gave the money to the government. They take it, buy stuff for us. So I think someone asked me to go back here maybe. Give everyone just a little break. It wasn't spotlighted for me. Yeah, it's because the only button I can hit is cancel spotlight video. Oh, it's possible. Wait a second. Is it possible you're looking at my burner account? I think I called that Jeff's burner, so probably not. I was demoing stuff I joined Zoom on my phone. It looks kind of funny. So I don't know if maybe someone accidentally was looking at that one or something. All right, so let me go ahead. Continue. So I don't know if you noticed, the president's taxes came up. How much he paid? It was $750, and the child tax credit is like $1,400. So if Barron had been twins, he could have turned a profit, or if he'd had one more, but he just missed it. We had we had one of our kids on she was born November 11th last year. The other one was born December 19th. And when you get a kid in before New Year's Eve, you get the tax credit for the whole year. So getting that one in on December 19th was clutch. Just goes to show you, having kids, great way to make money. Oh, so much money from having kids. Huge. All right, so we said that money's going in. Where's that money coming from? Well, our most common federal taxes. We got income taxes. That's a tax based on your income. That's the most sort of famous one when a certain person is known as paying $750 in income taxes. That's the number. That's that's the tax we're referring to. The payroll tax is I don't know why it's called that. It's based on your income as well. It's a type of tax used to pay for mandatory spending. We'll talk about what mandatory spending is later, but it's used to pay for things like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid. So Social Security, money for old people, Medicare, Medicaid, money to help people pay their medical bills. All right. So someone asked me to go back. It's kind of back to the taxes one, I think. So maybe it's funny. I had this one out here for a few minutes. All right. So what we're going to be thinking about are taxes, and who pays them is how we will start. So one major policy debate is who should pay taxes. So should high income people pay more taxes than lower income people, for example? Well, taxes are either progressive, proportional, or regressive. So again, this is another sort of collection of terms that are good to know. It's not like I'm gonna ask you a lot of questions on definitions, but this isn't important. This is one that matters. So
there are a couple of people asking what mandatory spending is.
I don't think we've gotten there yet. Oh, it is. We have. Let me think. So mandatory spending is spending that happens automatically every year. I'm not sure why it's there in the notes. So mandatory spending is money that happens automatically every year. So basically, most of what we spend money on as a country, or at least a lot of it, is stuff that every year Congress passes a budget and they say, yes, we're going to spend this much on the military and this much to the Department of Education and so on. Social Security, they don't do that. It's sort of codified into law, and it's the only way to adjust it is to pass a new law, and every time they try that, it's like a huge deal. And it's basically this mandatory spending is very difficult to adjust.
Can you go back a slide real quick? I said when you were talking, you were covering the whole slide, so
I thought it was funny. I got in when I was somebody sent me a request and let me know that I was often standing in front of the slides, and I had to tell them that, well, I'm trying to replicate the classroom experience, and often in Wells Hall you'll see me like this or like pointing at stuff. So income tax rate is the tax paid divided by income. And so that's, I think if you paid $100 in taxes on $1,000 of income, that would be 100 divided by 1,000, so 10%. All right, so here's next bubbles. For progressive tax, your average tax rate increases as income increases. Not just the tax, but the tax rate. So it's not just that you pay more money when your income goes up, but if you calculate your percentage of your income paid, your tax rate goes up. So progressive tax means the average tax rate increases as income increases. A proportional tax is one where the average tax rate is constant for all income levels. And a regressive tax is one where the tax rate decreases as income increases. So this classification is most common for income taxes. So you'll hear people who want a flat tax is what they mean by proportional tax, or discussion of how progressive should our income tax be, right? So should people who make $200,000 a year pay twice the rate of someone making $50,000, 10 times the rate, so on. However, this terminology can also be used for other kinds of taxes. So taxes on cigarettes are generally considered regressive because people who pay them are smokers. Smokers usually have lower incomes. You can think about, I've also seen lottery tickets as an example. So lottery tickets are by far purchased more by lower income people. So that's essentially what amounts to a regressive tax. So I'll throw the top hat on. So yeah, the answer here is progressive. So essentially what's this example. So someone asked about why, I saw in the chat, why you'd want a regressive tax. And I think somebody brought up the idea. So sales tax are generally thought of as being sort of more regressive taxes. Just lower income people tend to spend more of their money, more of their income. So in that sense, it is. So here's the math. 5,000 divided by 50,000 means Sarah pays a 10% rate. 20,000 over 100,000 means Hannah pays a 20% rate. Hannah has the higher income and the higher tax rate. The US federal income tax is progressive, so rates increase as your income goes up. So these are the tax brackets from like 2019, I think. One thing you'll notice is that while the tax system is progressive, once you get to like $200,000, your income tax, your bracket goes from 32 to 35. Then at 510 and above, it goes up to 37. So it's often not a huge, right? The rates don't really change by that much. So a couple other examples of taxes. So the Medicare tax rates, this is one of those payroll taxes. It is 1.45% of your income. That is a proportional tax because you pay it no matter what you pay 1.45%, whatever your income is. Social Security is 6.2%, but anyway, only the first $132,900 is taxable. So if any of you have had a very good summer job, you may have noticed that towards the end of the year you had to stop paying it. I want to know what that summer job is. Maybe you can hire me. This is actually regressive tax because once your income goes beyond $132,900, the tax rate goes to 0. That's sort of the way it was written. That's one people have taught. One of the things that's been proposed, as you would imagine, is changing these rules. So that is what we have for where the money comes from. Now we're going to learn a little bit about where the money goes. So federal government expenditures can be grouped into 3 things. I believe what I have here for you is a pie graph that you can fill in. The big green part, over half of it, is what we call mandatory. I think we'll see what all that is, what the components of that are. But mostly, this is important because when you hear talk about like doing something about federal spending, reducing the, reducing the deficit, one of the things that sort of gets lost is whatever, you hear talk about somebody wanting to cut money that we give to some department. Well, all that thing we're talking about is really just this relatively small red thing. And so if you're really trying to reduce government spending, it's really hard to do so if you are not touching discretionary spending. So. Should quiet the chat down. So even when the chat's off, I try to remember so you can always chat with me. So if like I go mute or something, you can still talk to me. All right, so this is mandatory spending. And so the biggest chunk of that is Social Security, 40%. Notice that's a lot of money because that's 40% of over half of the federal budget. So biggest chunk of that is Social Security. Next is Medicare. Notice that both of these are generally for older people. Income security, I think, is stuff like unemployment benefits. Medicaid is medical expenses of people with low incomes. Medicare is people who are old. Right, so that is mandatory spending. This is discretionary spending. Note that over half of discretionary spending goes to defense. That is relevant because, again, lots of money. So if you think about it, that means that if we add up all these things you see, Department of Transportation, Department of Education, transportation, funding our roads, education does a lot, obviously does stuff for schools, they do stuff for colleges. All of this combined is a little bit less than defense spending. So one of the ways you might see this is the government described by, I've seen a couple of economists say this. The US government is basically an insurance company backed by an army. Insurance company is, the mandatory spending is largely money to insure you against getting old, getting sick, losing your job. So a huge amount of the federal spending is on that. And other huge expense is an army. So we have an insurance company with a large standing army is a rough approximation of the government. So a lot of what we think about government spending doing is actually not done by federal, but by state and local. So that's things like elementary. So that's paying for elementary schools, colleges, local hospitals, local police. Those things are generally funded by state and local expenditures. That's at least what most of it comes from. So now what we want to think about is, where does the government get its goods and services? From the market, right? It is not just sort of, you give the government your money, and it just, somehow managed to turn it into a highway. No, they go to the resource market and they hire people. So resource examples include government employees. Oh, I took off the picture of my kid. So I used to be one of these people, right? Before I went to MSU, I was a government employee. So I was a government resource. I had a cute picture. I took my kid there on a Saturday morning, Maddie, and we went. I work right by the Smithsonian's. And so we went up and she sat in my chair. They got an ID. They even gave her an ID badge because we go into a federal building. They're into security. Anyway, so that used to be me. Goods and services. So that's when they buy a fighter jet from Boeing. It's like that. So we will move on now to budget deficits and surpluses. So like individuals and businesses, government expenses do not need to be financed by their current incomes. And instead, somebody asked me to go back for a hot second, which I assume is a short second. Not sure what I don't think this is even in the, so yeah. Resources, goods and services. So you hear about government borrowing, and if you think about it, this is something that the government's not alone doing, right? So people buy a house, and you don't have all the money for a house, so you borrow money. The US government, unlike you, has a big advantage. It can borrow money very inexpensively because there is almost no chance of the government defaulting. Right? So when you go buy your house, I'm actually maybe in the process of refinancing mine. I got quotes, I just got to go about and do it. Interest rates are so low now. So if anyone owns a house, you might want to think about looking into refinancing it. So the main reason that I have to pay interest and some, low interest rates, but still something, is because there is still a risk that I'm going to stop paying for my house. Certainly hope that doesn't happen. Hasn't happened yet. Whereas the government, that is not really a risk you take, right? That the government, the money that government pays when it borrows is thought of as the risk-free interest rate. It's like the baseline. Currently, the government can borrow money for 1 year at less than 2% interest, and that was, I think it's probably much less than 2% interest. I'm going to be able to get a mortgage at almost 2% interest, so. Governments can pay their bills by borrowing money. So a budget surplus is when government revenue exceeds government expenses, typically calculated annually. So if you end the year with more money than you started with, so you made $50,000 in your job and only spent $40,000, you had a surplus last year. A budget deficit occurs when government revenue is less than government expenses. And this is typically calculated annually. So again, maybe you earned $50,000 this year and spent 60, and chances are what that meant is you borrowed some money. Lots of people, right? In college, it's very common to have a budget deficit. If you go on to graduate school, especially. So my wife went to law school. And so when you're in law school, you're turning a deficit because you're making about no money, paying lots of money in tuition, with the understanding that hopefully you'll get a good job afterwards. So governments can pay their bills by borrowing money. Budget surplus is when it exceeds government expenses. Budget deficit occurs when revenue is less than government expenses. And the national debt is the total amount owed by a government. And so this is important. We want to make sure that we distinguish a surplus deficit from the debt. A lot of times in the news, this will really be misused. And so I think it's a really important thing to know. So deficit, you can think about it as, remember we said, it's when government revenue is less than government expenses, typically calculated annually. So you can think about a deficit is this month's credit card statement. So you get your credit card in the mail, and that is how much you owe your credit card company this month. So if you look at how much did I take in? How much do I owe for this month? A debt is the total amount owed on your credit card. So deficit is sort of is over a time period. So we can calculate the budget deficit over a month or a year or 10 years, whereas debt is the total amount owed. Let me show you an example here. I have a newly formed nation experiences a $1 billion deficit its first year, a $2 billion surplus its second year, and a $2 billion deficit in its third year. What is the national debt? The answer is 1 billion. How do we get there? We just added up -1 for our deficit, +2 for the surplus the next year, -2 for our deficit the third year. So the US national debt, often you'll see this calculated, and it looks something like this. And this is sort of the scariest way to present it, just that you see how much it increases. It's currently about $60,000 a person. However, there are less scary and probably more useful ways to present it. So for one thing, as the national debt has grown, GDP has grown a lot. So our country, our economy has gotten bigger and bigger. So if we think about national debt as a percent of GDP, it, for the most part, if you look from like 1991 or so to 2008, it sort of ran along. It wasn't really changing that much because debt was growing, but also the economy was growing. Then we had the Great Recession in 2008, and there was a big stimulus bill that went in. And the other thing that happens during a recession is because people lose their job and aren't making as much money, tax revenues fall. So we got lots of spending, lots of spending and not many taxes coming in. That leads you to have to borrow a lot of money. And then since then, you see it leveled out a little bit from about 2014 to 2018 or so. And then the other thing, if you remember, this is still the issue we have, which is that we're looking at debt instead of deficits. So if we look actually at a deficit as a percent of GDP, what we see now is that the average deficits have sort of not been changing by a huge amount. Again, there was a brief surplus period in the late 90s. Deficit, this right here again was the big spending following the Great Recession. Then these are projected budget deficits as a percent of GDP. All right, so that's